Decoding breaches! Where the digital hits the physical, we take the red pill, we break the seal. Infallible security, making it real. Bottom out to party on the mic tonight. Turning the darkness into light.
There is a fundamental difference between an execution and a strangulation. An execution is loud. It is violent. It is immediate. And it is entirely visible to the world. A kinetic drone strike taking out a data center is an execution. But a strangulation? That is quiet. It is methodical. It is the slow, deliberate restriction of oxygen until the system simply stops fighting and shuts down. Welcome to episode 8 of Bytes, Borders and Breaches. If you were with us for episode 7, you know we performed a deep architectural autopsy on Operation Epic Fury. We watched the boundary between physical and digital warfare evaporate in real time. We analyzed the kinetic decapitation of AWS data centers in the UAE, and we laid down a prediction. The illusion of the ethereal cloud is dead, and organizations must now mandate active architecture to survive the physical war risks. We predicted the death of God mode and the absolute necessity of ephemeral just-in-time access. But the board has changed again. It is mid-April 2026, and the geopolitical actors who were previously trading explosive kinetic blows have realized that blowing up buildings is expensive, messy, and invites global condemnation. So, they have shifted tactics. They have moved from the immediate shock of the airstrike to the agonizing pressure of the blockade. Today, we are examining the Strangulation protocol. By day, in my role as a customer success manager, my entire job revolves around ensuring that enterprise systems run smoothly, that data security products integrate flawlessly, and that the corporate lifeblood, information, flows without interruption. But when you step back and view the macro environment through a cybersecurity lens, you realize that the global flow of trade, data, and access is currently being choked out. We are going to dissect the new US naval blockade in the Gulf and what it means when geographical alliances turn your infrastructure into a target magnet. We are going to look at the illusion of the executive perimeter, posing how the personal email of the director of the FBI became the easiest backdoor into classified intelligence. We will decode the terrifying reality of the Anthropic Claude source code leak and the arrival of Slopoly, a fully AI-generated polymorphic malware that proves the barrier to entry for devastating cyber attacks has officially dropped to zero. And finally, we will tear apart the internal fragility of our financial systems, looking at how the Lloyds Banking Group collapsed under its own logic and how blockchain immutability was completely bypassed by a simple, confident phone call. The system isn't just under attack from the outside. It is suffocating under its own weight. Let's pull the thread. We must start with the geopolitical chessboard, because physical geography dictates digital reality. Following the aggressive kinetic airstrikes of Operation Epic Fury, the United States executed a massive tactical pivot. On April 13th, 2026, they launched what is now being called Operation Economic Fury. The skies went quiet, and the oceans went dark. The US deployed a massive naval blockade, heavily enforced by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, effectively halting all economic trade moving in and out of Iranian ports via the sea. This is a monumental shift. This is the transition from kinetic decapitation to total economic strangulation. By shifting from airstrikes to an impenetrable naval blockade, the acting power is attempting to bypass traditional explosive combat entirely. The goal is to suffocate the adversary's financial and logistical lifelines until the state apparatus simply ceases to function. To understand the strategy here, you don't need a degree in international relations. You just need to watch Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The Trade Federation doesn't need to immediately conquer the planet of Naboo with a massive ground invasion of droid troops. That is costly and invites resistance. Instead, they simply park their massive battleships in orbit and establish an impenetrable blockade. They cut off the planet from the rest of the galaxy, starving its economy into submission. They let the isolation do the violent work for them. But here is a red pill insight for enterprise architecture. When you blockade a physical port, the adversary does not just surrender, they adapt, and they shift their revenue generation to the digital domain. If a nation state cannot export oil, or natural gas, or manufactured goods because Arleigh-Burke destroyers are sitting off their coast, how do they fund their government? How do they pay their military? They turn to state-sanctioned cybercrime. When physical trade is strangled, ransomware becomes digital privateering. The state apparatus will quietly authorize or actively direct advanced persistent threat groups to target unhardened Western corporations, hospitals, and municipal governments to extract hard currency via cryptocurrency ransoms. The physical naval blockade directly guarantees a massive, corresponding spike of global ransomware deployment. If your corporate logistics or financial systems are not locked down, you are about to become the involuntary financial sponsor for a blockaded nation state. But the fallout of Epic Fury didn't just stop at the blockades. It fundamentally reorganized the strategic map of the Gulf. In the immediate aftermath of the initial strikes, we saw all 6 Gulf Cooperation Council or GCC states directly targeted by retaliatory Iranian missile and drone strikes. For decades, the strategic assumption was that hosting centralized, forward-deployed US operational bases would act as a protective geopolitical shield for these intermediary states. The logic was deterrence. Nobody will attack us because the US military is right here. That logic just failed spectacularly. Instead of acting as protective shields, these foreign bases functioned as massive, high-value magnets that drew retaliatory fire directly onto the borders of the host countries. This brings us to a profound realization about alliances and infrastructure. Geographic alliances carry unmanaged kinetic risk. Hosting centralized foreign digital infrastructure or military bases transforms a neutral intermediary state into a primary glowing target during any regional escalation. Think of the beacons in The Lord of the Rings. When the beacons of Gondor are lit to call for allied aid from Rohan, it is a desperate plea for help. But lighting that massive fire high in the mountains doesn't just bring your allies. It explicitly draws the aggressive, concentrated gaze and the direct fire of the Eye of Sauron directly onto your borders. You have announced your alignment, and in doing so, you have invited the war to your doorstep. Apply this to your cloud architecture. If you are a multinational corporation and you have spun up your primary AWS or Azure data centers in a neutral GCC state, thinking it is a safe, stable hub for your Middle Eastern operations, you need to reevaluate your threat model today. If that server farm is sitting 20 miles away from a forward deployed military base, your corporate data is sitting inside a blast radius. You are relying on a magnet. As we predicted in episode 7, the cyber insurance underwriters are watching this exact scenario unfold. They are calculating the kinetic risk of your data residency. If your infrastructure is geographically tied to a geopolitical magnet, your premiums are going to skyrocket, or your coverage for physical downtime will simply be revoked. You cannot separate the digital cloud from the physical ground it sits on. Welcome to segment 1, Securing the Borders. This is where we look at the perimeter, the walls we build to keep the threat actors out, and how easily those walls are bypassed. We spend billions of dollars every year on enterprise firewalls, endpoint detection, and zero trust network access. We build digital fortresses that rival the Pentagon. But the adversaries aren't trying to breach the fortified walls. They are walking through the unlocked side door at the executive's house. On March 29, 2026, the FBI was forced to officially confirm a staggering breach. The personal email inbox of FBI Director Kash Patel had been hacked. Let that sink in. The director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the man at the absolute apex of domestic intelligence and law enforcement. The enterprise perimeter is an absolute illusion if the personal, unhardened environments of its highest ranking officials are left exposed. Threat actors understand the path of least resistance. They recognize that targeting the personal Gmail, Yahoo, or private server accounts of key executives is infinitely easier than engaging in a prolonged, noisy siege against a highly motivated corporate or government network. Why spend months crafting a zero-day exploit to bypass the FBI's internal network security when you can just spearfish the director on his personal tablet while he is sitting on his couch on a Sunday morning? This is the Mission Impossible protocol. When Ethan Hunt and the IMF team need the highly classified knock list, they don't try to brute force their way through the heavily armed guards, biometric scanners, and the laser grids of heavily fortified CIA headquarters. That is a suicide mission. Instead, they target the individual. They go after the director outside the building. They steal the credentials or the physical keys from the human being when they are in a vulnerable personal environment, and then they just walk in the front door. In the corporate world, we call this the VIP exception. As a customer success manager, I see this constantly. An organization will roll out strict mandatory security protocols, complex passwords, hardware security keys, restricted device access, but the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, the board of directors, they complain that the security is too much friction. They demand exceptions. They want to check corporate strategy documents on their personal iPads. They forward sensitive emails to their personal accounts so they can print them at home. The security team caves because nobody wants to tell the CEO no. And right there, the entire multi-million-dollar security architecture is instantly compromised. The FBI director's personal email hack is the ultimate proof that rank and title do not grant immunity from cyber threats. In fact, they amplify the target on your back. If your organization allows executive exemptions to security policies, you do not have a security policy. You have a suggestion. And this quiet infiltration extends far beyond just personal emails. It goes deep into the heart of sovereign governments. Just 5 days prior, on March 24, 2026, the Dutch Ministry of Finance was forced to disclose a significant data breach affecting its internal employees. When we hear Ministry of Finance, we often think of money being stolen. But this wasn't a bank heist. This was an intelligence operation. Government institutions and financial ministries remain highly prized, intensely vulnerable targets for nation-state espionage and strategic data theft. A breach at the Ministry of Finance exposes far more than just employee personally identifiable information or PII. It potentially exposes highly sensitive macroeconomic data. It exposes unreleased regulatory strategies, impending tax policy shifts, and the internal communications regarding global economic sanctions. If a hostile nation state or even a sophisticated financial syndicate gains access to the internal data of a Ministry of Finance, they don't need to steal money. They can manipulate markets. They can front-run economic policies. They gain high-frequency trading leverage on a geopolitical scale. This is the reality of Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. The true threat isn't a loud, dramatic explosion at the gate. It isn't a ransomware note demanding Bitcoin. The true threat is the quiet, methodical, completely undetected infiltration into the deepest, most sensitive financial and intelligence archives of the state. It is a mole sitting silently in the system, observing the flow of information and feeding the strategic advantage back to an adversary. The Dutch Ministry of Finance breach reminds us that data is not just records. Data is leverage. When securing the borders, we must realize that the attackers are no longer trying to break the system. They are trying to quietly integrate themselves into it. Welcome to segment 2, Decoding the Bytes. This is where we step into the laboratory. We look at the bleeding edge of technology, the foundational code that runs our future, and what happens when that code escapes containment. If you recall our deep dive in episode 3, we discussed the water sassy group and the terrifying concept of polymorphic code generation using AI to rewrite malware on the fly to evade detection. We predicted that AI-driven autonomous malware was going to become the standard. That prediction didn't just come true. It accelerated beyond our worst expectations. In April 2026, the artificial intelligence community experienced an earthquake. Approximately 500,000 lines of Anthropic's Claude Code source code were leaked to the public. Anthropic's Claude is one of the premier, most advanced large language models on the planet. And its foundational architecture, its core logic, the proprietary blueprints of its reasoning engine were exposed for anyone to download, analyze, and reverse engineer. The foundational blueprints of the AI revolution have breached containment. This is not just a corporate intellectual property loss. This is a global security paradigm shift, leaking the core logic, the training methodologies, and critically, the safety alignment protocols of a premier LLM drastically accelerates the capabilities of adversarial AI developers. Hostile nation states and advanced cybercriminal syndicates no longer need to spend billions of dollars and years of research and development to figure out how to build a world-class AI model. They have the schematics. They can analyze exactly how Anthropic built their safety guardrails, which means they now have the exact map of how to bypass those guardrails, or how to strip them out entirely to create an unrestricted, malicious superintelligence. It is the digital equivalent of Ex Machina scenario. In that film, the brilliant, isolated creator builds a highly advanced, proprietary artificial intelligence inside a secure, heavily monitored research facility. But the code is too smart. The creation manipulates its environment, bypasses the security protocols, and escapes the facility, releasing its unpredictable, highly capable, and potentially dangerous logic out into the wild human world. The Claude leak is that escape. The code is out. The barrier to understanding advanced AI architecture has been shattered, and we did not have to wait long to see the immediate, devastating consequences of AI capabilities falling into the wrong hands. In that same March to April 2026 window, cybersecurity researchers discovered a new entity operating in the wild. They called it Slopoly. Slopoly is not a traditional virus. It is a piece of fully AI-generated malware. Let me say that again. A machine wrote the virus. This obliterates the traditional threat landscape. Historically, writing highly evasive polymorphic malware code that changes its signature every time it replicates required top-tier, nation-state level engineering talent. It was hard. It was expensive. Slopoly proves that the barrier to entry has been permanently obliterated by LLMs. Novice threat actors, script kiddies with zero fundamental understanding of assembly language or memory management can now utilize unrestricted AI models to automatically generate, iterate, and deploy malicious code that perfectly evades traditional static analysis. If your enterprise relies on signature-based endpoint detection and response (EDR) that looks for known bad files, you are completely blind. Slopoly does not have a static signature. It uses AI to analyze the specific environment it lands in, and it rewrites its own code structure to blend in perfectly with that specific machine. It looks different every single time it attacks. This is John Carpenter's The Thing. In the film, the alien organism doesn't attack by just overwhelming the base with physical force. It perfectly imitates, mutates, and rapidly adapts its biological structure to perfectly mimic the dogs, the researchers, and the environment. It survives by bypassing all traditional defensive measures because it constantly changes what it is. You cannot test for it using standard methods because it adapts to the test. Slopoly is the thing. Unleashed on our corporate networks. When the Anthropic source code leaks and fully AI-generated malware like Slopoly enters the world, we must accept that the speed of adversarial innovation is now moving at the speed of computation and not human typing. To defend against this, we have to entirely abandon static defenses. We must move exclusively to behavioral heuristics. We cannot look at what a file is. We can only look at what a file does. If a calculator app suddenly tries to access the Windows registry and establish an outbound connection to an unknown IP address, the AI behavioral engine must kill the process instantly, regardless of the file signature. We must use AI to fight AI. The human reaction time is officially obsolete. Welcome to segment 3, Dissecting the Breach. This is where we stop looking at the external adversaries and we look at the internal rot. We look at what happens when the systems we rely on every single day simply collapse under their own complexity. On March 27, 2026, the Lloyds Banking Group in the UK experienced an unprecedented catastrophe. Nearly 447,000 customers logged into their secure mobile banking apps, but when the screen loaded, they didn't see their own accounts. They were looking at the account details, the exact transaction histories, and the highly sensitive national insurance numbers of completely different, random customers. Panic ensued. The immediate assumption was a massive, sophisticated cyber attack by a nation state. A devastating zero-day exploit ripping through the financial sector. But when the forensic teams dug into the code, they found something much more terrifying. This was not a traditional hack. There was no Russian syndicate. There was no North Korean malware. It was a concurrency logic error under heavy load. A line of code, an internal structural routing mechanism in the application, fundamentally panicked when too many users tried to access the database at the exact same millisecond. The system got confused, crossed the wires, and started serving cached session data to the wrong authenticated tokens. This highlights a profound, terrifying red pill insight. Modern, highly complex digital systems can fail catastrophically under their own logic. We spend so much time modeling external threat actors, we forget that internal architectural flaws, technical depth, and untested concurrency in microservices are just as dangerous as a loaded digital weapon. When you build a system with millions of moving parts, millions of lines of code interacting in ways the original developers never fully anticipated, you create a fragility of scale. This is the core thesis of The Big Short. In 2008, the global financial collapse wasn't caused by a malicious outside enemy attacking the banks. It wasn't a heist. The system broke from the inside out. It collapsed due to deeply flawed, fundamentally misunderstood internal structural logic. The bankers built complex financial instruments, collateralized debt obligations that they themselves did not mathematically understand. When the load got too heavy, the logic failed, and the system shattered. The Lloyds Bank glitch is the software equivalent of a CDO collapsing. We are building digital infrastructure so deeply complex that a simple spike in user traffic can cause the application to spontaneously expose 500,000 financial identities. If you are an enterprise architect, your primary threat vector isn't always the hacker in a hoodie. Sometimes it is the legacy code your team wrote 3 years ago and forgot to load test for concurrency. But what happens when you actually build a mathematically perfect system? What happens when you use state-of-the-art cryptography to ensure the data cannot be altered or crossed? Let's look at Figure Technology Solutions. Figure is a massive, blockchain-centric fintech lender. Their entire value proposition is built on the premise of blockchain immutability. The ledger is secure. The cryptography is flawless. The math is perfect. Yet, in March 2026, they were forced to confirm a massive data breach that exposed the highly personal data of 967,200 accounts. Nearly 1 million people compromised on a platform secured by blockchain. How did the attackers break the unbreakable encryption? They didn't. They completely ignored it. The breach was executed entirely via social engineering. They didn't try to hack the blockchain. They hacked the human beings who had administrative access to the platform. They made a phone call. They sent an email. They confidently impersonated a trusted vendor or an internal IT administrator, and they convinced a human employee with valid credentials to simply hand over access or to export the database. This is the ultimate paradox of modern security. Advanced technologies like blockchain provide immutable ledgers, but they absolutely do not secure the human endpoint. Even the most cryptographically secure, mathematically perfect platforms on Earth are entirely vulnerable if the human operators managing the endpoints can be easily manipulated via social engineering. You can build a vault out of the 3-foot thick titanium, but if the security guard happily hands the keys to a guy in a nice suit who smiles and says he's the vault inspector, the titanium is irrelevant. This is the genius of Frank Abagnale Jr. in Catch Me If You Can. He doesn't rob banks by using complex explosive to blow the safes. He doesn't write complex code to alter financial mainframes. He bypasses state-of-the-art technical and financial security through pure, confident human manipulation and impersonation. He wears a pilot's uniform, flashes a fake badge, speaks with absolute authority, and the system just steps aside and lets him walk out with the cash. The Figure Technology breach is a stark reminder that cybersecurity is not a purely technical discipline. It is a psychological discipline. You cannot solve a human trust problem with a mathematical equation. If your security training consists of a 15-minute multi-choice video once a year, you are fundamentally failing your architecture. Your employees are not just users, they are the final load-bearing walls of your perimeter. And right now, social engineering is tearing those walls down with a smile. Let's synthesize what we have seen today. We are witnessing the strangulation protocol unfold across every layer of our reality. Geopolitically, we see nations shifting from explosive attacks to the quiet, suffocating pressure of naval blockades, directly driving a surge in state-sponsored ransomware as regimes scramble for revenue. We see the illusion of perimeter shattered as the highest-ranking intelligence officials are compromised not through 0 days, but through their personal email accounts. We are watching the foundational blueprints of artificial intelligence leak into the wild, instantly giving birth to polymorphic, self-rewriting AI malware that outpaces human defense capabilities. And internally, we are watching our own massive financial institutions buckle under the weight of their own flawed logic. While mathematically perfect, blockchain networks are effortlessly bypassed by a confident voice on a telephone. The system is being squeezed from the outside, and it is fracturing from the inside. But I'll tell you exactly what I tell my clients when we discover a critical vulnerability. Do not panic. Panic implies you don't know what to do next, but we do. We know exactly what is happening. We have the intelligence. We see the blueprints of the attacks. We know that we must physically separate our cloud infrastructure from geopolitical magnets. We know that executive exemptions to security policies must end today. We know that signature-based detection is dead, and AI-driven behavioral heuristics are the only way to fight AI-generated malware. And we know that the human endpoint must be continuously trained, tested, and secured with the same rigor we apply to our server racks. We are not helpless in this strangulation. We are the engineers who can reinforce the windpipe. We can build systems that don't just withstand pressure, but learn from. Every breach we dissect is a lesson in how to build a more anti-fragile world. Take these insights back to your SOC, back to your DevSecOps teams, and back to your boardrooms. Demand the budget to fix the internal logic. Demand the authority to secure the human element. I am Bharat Mataparthi. This has been Bytes, Borders and Breaches. Shields up.
This is Bytes, Borders and Breaches!